Hello and welcome along to another episode of Shattered Lives, Reach Ireland's crime podcast. I'm joined by Michael O'Toole, who is the crime and defence editor of the Irish Daily Star and the Irish Mirror. And today is our Week in Crime podcast, where we look back over crime stories of the past 7 days. I'm Eoin Murphy, a news editor for both papers, filling in for Paul Healy, our crime correspondent, who is on leave this week. And this episode is produced by Andre Skintian. Mick, good morning.
Hello, Eoin. How are you? Another busy week.
Absolutely. There was big news today in the world of policing with the General Secretary of the Association of Garda Sergeants and Inspectors, Antoinette Cunningham. She's announcing her retirement from the Garda and the AGSI, is it?
Yes. So Antoinette is the Association of Garda Sergeants and Inspectors, but does what it says in the tin. There are two main representative bodies. One is the GRA, the Garda Representative Association, which represents rank and file Gardaí. Then the next level up, the supervisors, sergeants, inspectors, are represented by AGSI, and Antoinette really was a fearsome advocate for the Guards. We were talking earlier. I remember doing a story just last year. She effectively mounted a one-person sit-in at the offices of GSOC, which is the Independent Watchdog on Policing. They're the organisation that investigates allegations against Gardaí. So she sat in and she said, "I'm not leaving until you deal with this." And it went on for a couple of hours, but she got her way. And she got, I think it was a sergeant who had been suspended, and she was not leaving that building until, the way it works is GSOC don't suspend people, but Garda headquarters suspends people in the foot of GSOC investigations. And she wanted that Garda sergeant unsuspended, and she was not leaving until that happened. And she got her way. And so the paperwork was sent up to Jonathan Roberts, who's the Assistant Commissioner in charge of discipline within the Guards. So really, I mean, I have the height of respect for Antoinette. She really was a fantastic advocate and for Guards, sergeants and inspectors, I suppose, and a fantastic defender of them. So really, really, really determined, and she will be massively missed, I think, as a representative by her officers.
Yeah, she was somewhat unique in that she was a woman holding the role. I know in 2018, she made Irish policing history. She became the first full-time female official in a Garda representative organisation. So up until then, I take it was always men at the helm, was it?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the nature of policing has changed. There are more and more female members of all ranks. And we obviously, with Nuala O'Sullivan, we did have a female commissioner, and Shauna Coxon and Anne-Marie McMahon are the two deputy commissioners in the Garda Síochána are both female. So there has been progress. But look, I mean, I go to the GRA conferences and the AGSI conferences and the Association of Supers, and I suppose, I don't know why, but most of the delegates would be male. That's just, most of the Guards are male. I suppose it's representative of that way. But yeah, there has been an increase in female membership, and Antoinette really was top notch. And I presume, look, she's retiring, but she's got 33 years service. I won't say her age, but 33 years service. So I say she's in her 50s. So I'd say there's an awful lot of life left in her yet. So some other organisation, I presume, is going to be very lucky to have her working for her.
Yeah, she went out with a bang as well. She was involved in the negotiation of the new public sector pay deal only last week. So she was obviously active until right the end.
She's a fearsome negotiator. I know people who've been in the room with her, and she does not take any mess. And we had that story about GSOC, but she really, really holds the line. And people would tell me, they say all the representative bodies, Garda, GRA, AGSI, supers and chiefs, they're all in the room. But it's always Antoinette who's sat across opposite the commissioner or whatever deputy commissioner it is. So she was a fearsome advocate. So she'll be missed.
Yeah, and who's going to take over from her now?
Oh, I don't know. Look, I mean, it'll be, I presume there'll be a competition. It's interesting. I know that the GRA had an external the General Secretary, an interim General Secretary. Now, the General Secretary is a serving guard who has moved over. So there was always a tradition that it was a serving member who took over, but you never know. There might be somebody in from the outside, but look, I'm sure there'll be more than enough candidates.
Yeah. You had a great story there on the front of the Star today about the Dublin riots and Gardaí arresting and quizzing a man over the torching of a squad car during the Dublin riots last November. There was a good headline on the front page as well. Yeah, so I just wanted to talk about, not necessarily the story, but it's just about the headline. So the story, as you say, about a man being held on suspicion of setting a Garda car on fire during the riots on the 23rd of November. Now, that man
A man has now been charged, so we'll go down that road. But I just wanted to draw attention to the headline. Readers who are watching or viewers on YouTube, be able to see it says "Flame Grilled," and it just got me thinking about the headlines that there have been in the Star. I think the Star, particularly the Star, the Mirror as well, but the Star is really well known for its headlines. And just to explain to people, you and I've written one headline in my 23 and a half years in the Star. You probably haven't written any, because it is really, there's a specific cohort of people, we call them the backbench, so assistant editors. So really, people like Rohan Smith, John Mitchell, the deputy editor, and Neil Leslie, the editor, he writes headlines as well. So there's a small group of people who write these headlines, and I really enjoy getting up in the morning and seeing what headlines they are. Some of them really are quite genius, I have to say.
Yeah, they've had some great ones over the years. Are there any particular ones that would stand out for you?
Yeah, so I would remember ones that were headlines over stories that I did. So I'm going to talk about a couple of them. Some of them really, you have the story and you go to bed at night going, that's going to be a great story. And it's a splash or a front page story. And then it's overshadowed, I suppose, by the headline. Some really genius ones. So I remember a couple of years ago, I did a story about a lad who went to a McDonald's drive-through down the country. And for some reason, he decided to get his Mickey out at the when he was talking to the teller. So he was done, whatever it was. So we had the story. Now, it was sent in by a freelancer. We made it a splash by getting the man's photograph. Your cell phone photos make the story.
Yeah.
And I thought, happy days, great story. But the headline eclipsed it. It was a quarter pounder with sleaze. That actually won an award that year. So people will know that there are annual journalism awards. Paul Healy won the Crime Journalist of the Year last year. There's always a headline of the year and a front page of the year. So the Star more often than not wins the headlines. We're very, very lucky. So I'm just going to a couple of others that have jumped out at me. The feud got an awful lot. If you remember when the funeral of David Byrne took place, he was murdered in the Regency. So I've spoken about this before, but Mick O'Neill and I were up above in a plane taking pictures of it. When Mick was taking pictures of it, I was just enjoying the ride, I suppose. But we got a great shot of all the mourners getting into the church just off Cork Street there. And I always remember the headline. It was really, really good. It was mass murder. Then there was another one. Last year, there was a story about a drugs mule who had secreted or swallowed Kinder, the wee Kinder balls, filled with drugs, and the headline was genius: Kinder supplies. And I'll just talk about one more. Do you remember last year there was this story about an Irish man, dual Irish Mexican man, who was from Killarney, near Killarney, Killorglin in County Kerry, and he was implicated. It was alleged that he was part of that Sinaloa cartel. Do you remember that story? He went down. We got a picture of him and we spliced with it, right?
I do.
The headline was brilliant. It was El Chapo the morning to you. So I have to say, headlines are a gift. And I'll just finish in this. I've done two. I won't go into one because it got me in the doo-doo. But one I did was, there was a story. I remember I got a story about some criminal investigation into alleged criminality within Aer Lingus. So it was the splash. And I remember it was John Mitchell, when we were in the office, he was sitting there and they sort of sometimes ask about headlines and stuff. And I don't know why, it just came to me, Con Air, AER. And I remember John just went, huh, but it was a splash. So they did use it. So I was delighted with that. But anyway, I just wanted to mark the geniuses we have for writing headlines in the Star. We're very, very lucky to have them.
Yeah, some of the ones that when the monk was on the run were great, like Jerry the Bunk Hutch and Tash Me If You Can when he was growing a beard and all that. There was some great ones done around the monk before the monk was found not guilty of the murder of David Byrne.
And even when he was extradited from Spain to Ireland on the CASA 235, Aircore CASA T235, I think the headline was touchdown, as in touchdown, because we have pictures of him coming in. So, the tabloid headline writing, it is a skill because you only have a very, very small amount of space. It's not like the Irish Times, they can have a 2-deck, 25-word or 20-word headline. Ours is sometimes 1 or 2 words. And it does really have to encapsulate things. So it's a real skill. I've often said, we should bring out a book of our best headlines and front pages. I think it would do well. But anyway.
Definitely. One man who dominated a lot of headlines last week was Ian Bailey, and we spoke a lot about Ian Bailey last week. Of course, the prime suspect for the murder of Sophie Toscan de Plantier. There were some more developments after we spoke last. There was some items seized from his flat. What was the story there, Mick?
Yeah. So that was, we were actually talking about going down to it. We were going to go down on maybe Saturday or Sunday, trying to get in to see if we could get in or do something about the neighbours, because he was living on Barrack Street in Bantry, the centre of Bantry, and he actually died of his massive heart attack a few yards from the house. Friday afternoon, the guards declared it a crime scene and sealed it off and effectively searched it and seized a whole rake of items. So his car was outside, so they seized that and took a rake of items from his car, and then they also went into the house. So they seized dozens, maybe hundreds of different items. We know they had a huge amount of paperwork, documents, notebooks, all that sort of stuff. But they also seized computers, phones, we think, and various things. So that's all being examined. Now, the goal would be if somewhere in those writings he had a written confession for murdering Sophie Tusk on the plot.
Highly unlikely, I'd imagine that. What would you think?
I'd say, 2 chances, slim and none. Okay? But they still have to do their due process. Now, it was interesting. I was speaking to a source about this because we wanted to see how long this process would be. So there's 2 aspects to this. All the electronic documents, phones, whatever they have, will be sent to the Garda National Cybercrime Bureau in Dublin. Now, that's a lengthy process. They examine all electronic things like computers and everything. That's going to take quite a while. But all the written documents, all the paperwork, the hard copy, you and I would call them, they also have to be examined. And if every page has to be examined to see if there's anything to it. Now, just say by any chance there is a confession on it, they have to do their due diligence in that. Just say if it's there, how do they know it was him? So they'll have to do things like analyse his handwriting. They'll have to do DNA tests. They'll have to do fingerprints. So all that is going to take some time. So the best guidance that was given to me is that it's going to be several months before that whole examination is complete. But I think you're right, Eoghan. I think we shouldn't really hold our breath for any confession.
Yeah, when it comes to cold cases like these, one of the key factors is to try to, if there has been advances in forensics in the meantime, and that they can glean a DNA profile from both Ian Bailey and a DNA profile from something that was on the scene. Is there any prospect of a breakthrough like that, do you think?
Well, they have his DNA. He gave a voluntary blood test like in 1997, and it doesn't change. You take a profile, so there's no need to do a fresh DNA test for him. So they have it, but they will. There is a new test that has been developed in America. We know that she was beaten to death with a rock or a big stone, basically, wasn't it? Now, I remember doing a story a couple of years ago that there was a DNA test done of that, and nothing of evidential value was found. In other words, there was nobody's DNA, nobody else's DNA. Miss Duplante's DNA was on it because obviously it was blood. But there is a new technique. It's something like vacuum packing or something about vacuum, where it's much more concentrated, and you can basically, the belief would be you can get analysis from this vacuum technique. So there's an American expert, has solved several crimes, and he said he's willing to do that. But look, DNA tests and DNA sensitivity does improve, massively every couple of years. So, maybe there might be something, maybe that might be a way out of it.
Yeah. And do the Gardaí have all their eggs in the Ian Bailey basket, or is there any other suspect out there, do you think?
I think the guards are really focusing on him. That doesn't mean that they're going down a blind alley of saying there's nobody else, but my belief is they believe he's the killer. They will look at anything else comes up. There have been other people looked at, but really, I think the main man is Ian Bailey. I think that's an accepted belief that the guards have their man.
Yeah, and of course, there can be no solving of the case if that's the case, because Ian Bailey is deceased. But if there's to be any closure for the family, what closure could they get if it was Ian Bailey?
Yeah, so what can happen is the guards we understand the guards will be sending another file to the Director of Public Prosecutions. There were 2 sent before, as you'll know, and on each occasion the DPP said not enough evidence for a charge. There is a new investigation. There's a cold case review, and the investigation is ongoing. If there is a DNA or if there is more evidence of a circumstantial note, there might be something. So what will happen is the guards will send a file to the DPP, and what they do hope will happen is that, as in some historical clerical sex abuse cases, the DPP has looked at a file and said, okay, I know this man's dead, but were this man to be alive, looking at the evidence, I believe there's enough evidence to sustain a charge and a conviction. So I would have charged in this case. And that's really what the guards are hoping for in this case, that the DPP will say, look, based on all the evidence, based on all the new developments, if Ian Bailey were alive today, I would have authorised his charging.
Okay, so
that will effectively see the case being closed.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting to see what the Sophie Toscan-Plantier's family would think of that, if they would get some form of closure from that. I would expect they probably would. Well,
I did speak to Jean-Pierre Gazot, who's the uncle of Sophie, and he spoke about the truth coming out, which, in other words, their truth is that Ian Bailey killed Misty Plantier, and they want that truth to come out. So that, they can't get a conviction, but if the guards and the DPP did say, based on this, I think that would give them the closure. That's really what they want.
Okay, yeah. I know when we did the podcast last week, a lot of people told me they were amused about the story I told about my mother getting a book of poetry as a Christmas present for me and Bailey back in 2021, I think it was, when I was down in West Cork. Do you have any similar anecdote of your experiences with Ian Bailey?
But of course, there's always a time for me making an absolute flute of myself that our listeners like listening to. Essentially, I always talk about Mick O'Neill. He is my wingman and Paul Healy's wingman, so we go together everywhere. Maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I got a tip. Someone sent me a newspaper front page, Southern Star, Ian Bailey done for drink driving. And I thought, oh, Jesus, happy days. Here's our splash. So we headed now Dublin to Schull or Tourmore. It's 4 hours, maybe 5 hours, is it? It's a good long drive.
Yeah, good long drive.
It's a long drive.
As my grandfather used to say, you're halfway there when you get to Cork City. So
exactly. Everybody thinks you're in Cork. So we were driving down. Desk was all excited. I'd be telling you, here's the splice, Ian Bailey done for drink driving. Got down to Schull, met Mick. We decided to marshal our forces before we went and doorstepped and what we were going to do. And I took another look at the front page, and it was from 10 years earlier. So I had to ring Billy Scanlon, the head of news, and say, Billy, we've just driven for 8 hours in a round trip, and I have made a complete hames of it here. Sorry, but they were grand. It happens.
Right,
I've lived it down.
That's a great story altogether. There was another Cork murder in the news this week. Well, it's a suspected murder, I suppose, at this point. Decomposed remains found in East Cork on Monday. Who's the victim there, or who's the suspected victim?
Yeah, so again, this pod is coming out on Friday. It's been recorded on Thursday. I'd say by the time the pod comes out, the body will be formally identified. But I think Garda are of the belief and are convinced it's a missing man called Kieran Quilligan. Now, he's a 47-year-old from Cork City. He was last seen in Cork on the 1st of September. Now, what is interesting about this, very quickly after the disappearance of Mr. Quilligan, the family were very concerned and Gardaí were very concerned. And I think within days, Gardaí believed that he had been killed. And there has been an intelligence-led operation since then. So remains were found in a place called Whitegate, which is in East Cork on Monday. It's about 27 kilometres from Cork City, good distance. But that wasn't by chance. That was what they call an intelligence-led operation. So the guards had intelligence that the body of Mr. Quilligan was there, and a cadaver dog, a dog that is specially trained to scent human remains, went down. The cadaver dog made an indication, really, I'm told, within a couple of minutes. So it was very, very quick. And they found the human remains there. So there is DNA analysis going on at the minute that has to go to Dublin for a comparison. It could be today, it could be tomorrow. We're expecting it, but there is almost certainty that the human remains are those of Mr. Quilligan.
Okay. And if they are those of Kieran Quilligan, do they know why he was murdered? What's the motive?
Yes, they have a very strong indication that he did have addiction issues, and the belief would be that he fell foul of not a massive drugs gang, but a medium, small, in other words, not a Kinahan-sized gang or the family that we refer to in Clondalkin, just a small gang, that he fell foul of them. So essentially what happened, he was, they found 3 locations that they believe are vital, central to this investigation. One is they believe he was attacked in a property in Cork City. From there, he was taken in a car to a place, Little Island. Listeners may know Little Island. It's that big roundabout. When you come down into Cork, to the left of that is Little Island. So they believe that he was brought there, further assaulted and actually murdered there. It was really, really bad murder. He suffered dozens of fractures, really, really bad. And then from there, when he was dead, he was put in a car, driven from Little Island to Whitegate, in East Cork, and his body was dumped. So it's really gruesome. So hopefully the family will get some news later on today or tomorrow that it is him, but there will be a murder investigation launched.
It's always interesting, these cases where a body is found months later. Of course, in some cases we have bodies missing for 30 and 40 and 50 and 60 years. In one case, I think the longest missing persons case in Ireland dates back to the 1940s. So it does take Gardaí a long time to find bodies in some cases. I suppose Ireland is so rural and whatever else, it can be difficult.
Yeah, if you look at Operation Trace, the missing women, there were searches for Fiona Pender, there were searches for Jojo Dollard, there were searches for Deirdre Jacob, and I think in several of those cases, guards were really, really hopeful of finding the human remains. Even if you think of, say, Trevor Daly, who went missing, I think it was December 1999 or December 2000, a long, long time, and there was a search for him a couple of years ago near Phoenix Park. Around Inchicore area, and the guards were absolutely convinced they were going to find him, and they didn't, and it was a real crushing blow. But that investigation is ongoing. I think in many cases the guards don't know. In other cases they have suspicion, but it all depends on people coming forward. Say, for example, in the case of Fiona Pender, somebody connected to the suspect did come forward and say, I have information that she is buried there, and they were brought to the scene, and it was a very, 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 very big dig, but it just fell short.
Yeah, I know in the case of the likes of Annie McCarrick, who they suspect may have gone missing in the Dublin Mountains or the Wicklow Mountains, and she may have been murdered. And the Dublin Mountains is so vast, isn't it? We have an awful lot of vast rural land in Ireland where you could bury a body.
Yeah, just one thing, that was the sort of the theory for a good long time, but they're now satisfied that she was actually murdered. She was in sort of Sandy Mount in the south central Dublin.
Okay. That's
where she was living. And the guards are satisfied now that that's where she was murdered. So there was a sighting of her up at Johnny Fox's in South Dublin. They don't believe that was the case. It was good intention spot, but they don't believe that was her. Okay. They do believe the answer lies in the Sandy Mount area of south central Dublin. So I'm not going to say it was a wild goose chase. They chased down theories, but really the focus is in south central Dublin now.
Okay. Every year, I know you keep a tally of homicides, in other words, murders or cases of manslaughter. Have there been many this month?
Yeah, so there have been two. Now, one in North. There's another journalist, Conor Feehan, in the Irish Independent Media House, and I were the only journalists who do this. We keep a tally because every death counts, and every death needs to be remembered, and every death, as journalists, every death needs to be covered. So we have a tally. We help each other out. So last year, to give you an example, there were 42 homicides in all Ireland. Okay, in January 2023, there were 7 north and south. This year, we've had 2. One, a man called Kevin Walsh in Tala, and one, a man called Kevin Conway in Belfast. A man has just been charged in relation to that, so I won't say more on that, but 1 each. So that's a dramatic reduction on last year. Now, your listeners will know we did speak about Mr. Quilligan. His body was found, we believe it's his body. His body was found on Monday, obviously in January, but that technically is a murder from September last year when he went missing. So his death, if it's confirmed, will be added to last year. And then obviously we'll know that Jason Hennessy died of his injuries connected to this Christmas Eve shooting on the 4th of January this year. So technically his death, it's a double murder. His death is in last year. So there have been 2 homicides this year, and it's down a good amount, as I said, from 7 last year. So hopefully there won't be too many more.
Yeah, I suppose we put a lot of focus, obviously, on murders in Ireland. How do we compare internationally? Like, obviously, we're not on the scale of London or any of these major cities that have an awful lot of murders. But, do we have a high number of murders and manslaughters internationally compared to other countries? No,
and I always look at there's an interesting aspect. I always look at Scotland. Never mind England and Wales or Northern Ireland, because Northern Ireland has only got 1.5 million people. And as I say, I'm a 32 county person, so I always do a 32 county aspect to it. But if you look at Scotland, it's roughly got the same population as us. Okay, so their homicide rate is effectively the same as ours. So some years it could be 50, some years it could be 30. You know what I mean? But it's a variable of that. So it is quite low. But interestingly, our gun homicides are always higher. So really, in Scotland, you would have effectively one gun homicide a year. Now, last year in Ireland, there were 3. Maybe 5 in the whole thing. So it's always higher for some reason, and I don't know why, but it's always higher in Ireland than it is in Scotland, our nearest comparator.
And are gun homicides often linked to gangland murders? Are gangland often gun?
The vast majority of gun murders in Ireland are gangland. So say if there were maybe 7 last year, probably 6 of them were gangland. Say I think there were 3 in all of Ireland last year. 2 of them were gangland. So it's rare that a gun homicide is not gangland, but there are, if you remember, there was the terrible murder homicide in Cork a couple of years ago. The family were killed, and I think the mother and the son were killed, and that was with legally held rifles. That's not gangland, but the vast bulk, you're talking 95% of all gun homicides in Ireland are gangland.
Yeah, I remember being at a crime conference one time and they were talking about, or one expert was talking about how the fact that gangland murders are often the most difficult to solve because they're pre-planned and they're planned in advance and they're done with the most kind of precision. Is that kind of your experience, that they're the ones that the Gardaí find hardest to solve compared to, let's say, domestic killings or whatever?
Yes. So I think last year, the Guards and the PSNI probably solved, if not every murder, 99% of them. So really high. I think gangland is about 40%. And I always remember being told that one of the great difficulties, apart from the planning and that stuff, is witnesses. So say if you look at, because some witnesses are too frightened to come forward. Say if you look at the Freddie Thompson, when he was done for the murder of Daithí Douglas, that was done chiefly by really great police work, but it was chiefly looking at photographs, looking at CCTV, cell site analysis, mobile phone analysis, and they built up enough picture, and there were 2 guards who identified Freddie Thompson. So in a lot of gangland cases, people are too terrified to come forward, and that's a big issue for the guards and for the PSNI.
Okay. Just moving on to drugs. I know cocaine is the drug that gets most attention at the moment. I suppose we often hear about cocaine in every town and village in Ireland. I was interested in your stats that cocaine is not actually the biggest drug when it comes to seizures. Is that the case?
It never is. I always do. Every year, the Garda annual report comes out and they give a breakdown of the forensic science, the drugs that are examined. And you can use that and look at it because they give weights and values. And every year, the biggest drug that is seized by Gardaí, and so by extrapolation, the most popular drug in Ireland is cannabis. I think second is cocaine, maybe heroin. But heroin, cocaine and cannabis are the big 3. But by a country mile, it is always cannabis. So I'm just going to talk through some data that I've got. I mentioned that we do a running tally on homicides. I've decided this year to do one for drug seizures, all notified drug seizures. And I'll tell you why. Last year, you might remember this, around December, I decided to do a review of all major drug seizures in Ireland, right? Now, last year was a bumper year, and I'll be totally honest, it was a complete pain in the hoop because I had to go back to January and I had to do every one. Now, the MV Matthew it was 142 million, probably 3 times that, but I think it was maybe 150 million throughout the year of drug seizures not connected, and it took me days and days to do it. So I'm doing a running tally. So for this year, for the month of January, Customs and the Gardaí seized 6.97 million worth of drugs in a month. It's quite a lot.
6.7. And where are the drugs seized? Is it down a lane, somebody down a lane doing a drugs deal, or in the post, or what?
No. I'll tell you exactly. There were 16 separate seizures, okay? 11 of them were of cannabis. Now, of those 11 seizures, 7 were intercepted by Customs of parcels or posts that had been sent to Ireland. I think it's really interesting that in 7 cases, now some of them were 50,000 euro, 10,000 euro, 20, 30,000 euro, not insignificant amounts. So I don't know if this is new, because I remember covering if you heard of the Westies crime gang from the Northeast in Suggan Coates, I remember doing a story about them that they were sending drugs in by the post. And if you remember, John Gilligan was suspected of sending drugs into Ireland from Spain by the post. But there's obviously been an uptick. 7 of the 11 seizures this year, in January alone, have been of parcels being sent to Ireland. And the press releases say they were sent from Croatia, they were sent from America, they were sent from wherever, and they were sent to addresses here. So obviously, we know that there was a big, huge seizure of cocaine, £3.5 million at Rosslare Port. And that was on a lorry or whatever. Obviously, that's a big one. But it's just really interesting, the amount of drugs that are being sent into Ireland by post. I just thought it was really, really interesting. Anyway, so there were 2 seizures of cocaine, 2 of heroin, and 11 of cannabis. So it just goes to show you it's all about cannabis, baby.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot, but it's often said that law enforcement agencies detect or seize about 1 in every 10 parcels of drugs that come into the country. Is this just the tip of the iceberg, about 10% of what's coming into the country, do you think?
Well, it's a movable feast. Some customs, I think, would say they get 40%. The guards would say probably closer to 10%. But I think they agree that most drugs coming into Ireland actually gets through the net. Now, last year was a bumper year, but even then, I remember talking to a man called Mick O'Sullivan, who was former head of the Garda Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau, then to be Assistant Commissioner, and then headed up MAOC, which is the EU's anti-drugs enforcement, anti-drug smuggling organisation. And I always remember him telling me, cocaine is a barometer of the economy. So in the noughties, when everybody was flahulic, people started using cocaine and went through the roof. When the recession came in, people didn't have money, they couldn't spend 100 quid or whatever, cocaine went down. Now the economy is booming, so cocaine is back up again.
Okay. Where does all this cocaine and cannabis originate from? Is it Colombia, South America? Where does it come from?
Yeah, it's Colombia, Peru, Ecuador. They're the main areas, mostly Colombia. And we know that the guards have sent a liaison officer to Colombia at the minute. So all cocaine is produced in that sort of South Central America area, mostly Colombia, but Peru and Ecuador and around there. Cannabis comes from Morocco, around that area. Heroin comes from Afghanistan. And there are various routes. We know that, for example, cocaine usually goes into West Africa, up through Africa, over to Spain, on the European mainland, then over to Ireland that way. So, but we also know, for example, with the MV Matthew, that they do send drugs from Colombia to the Irish coast, and there are worries because it is quite porous. The naval service is quite weak, that sort of thing. So, look, there's no doubt Ireland is a transit point for drugs to Britain and Europe.
Okay. There's obviously an awful lot of talk at the moment after the Citizens' Assembly was on about whether we should legalise some drugs, decriminalise some drugs. Like, what's the situation at the moment? Like, are Gardaí going after any of the users, or is it just the dealers they're interested in now?
No, they are, but I think they have a policy of non-prosecution if it's what they call simple possession. So there's 2 types of possession: simple possession and possession with intent to supply. They obviously go after people, and now this is in relation to cannabis. If you're found with heroin or cocaine or whatever, you're done. But if it's simple possession of cannabis, you don't get prosecuted. But if it's possession with intent to supply, then you're in so much trouble. Okay,
yeah. And these small-time dealers, I presume there are small-time dealers in these rural towns with 10 or 12 clients. Like, would the Gardaí be bothered with the likes of that, or is it just the regional kingpins of dealers they'd be going after?
No. I mean, what's interesting about this, my data, so the Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau is the big one that goes after the Cunningham gang. But of all the seizures this month, they've been mostly by customs, but also local Garda units. So, for example, €300,000 worth of heroin on the 27th of January was seized by the Bridewell Garda Detective Unit. Big seizure. Then there's the Kildare Drugs Unit did one, Bray Drugs Unit, Kerry the Division Drugs Unit, Finglas, which is very busy, but they're very busy with drugs. So there are local drugs unit, division of drugs units around the country. So they do street level, and there's also a push now to go. You go for street level, you go for middle ranking dealers, and then you leave Doc B. It's sort of pound, look after the pennies, and the pounds will look after themselves. So the Doc B go after the big fish, local units go after the medium-sized fish. So they go after all sorts of and all levels of dealers.
Okay, so that's interesting. So it is the small-time dealers and the big dealers and the regional kingpins and whoever else they're going after.
Anybody and everybody. They don't discriminate. They go after crimes.
Yeah. We mentioned at the start about the Dublin riots. In an overall sense, November, the Dublin riots took place, that horrendous night. What progress have the Gardaí made in terms of bringing people to... in terms of arresting or charging people?
Yeah, so as I say, we had the front page story today on a man's charge. I'll be careful on that, but we can say, and we've done several stories about this, that the guards have up to 200 suspects. we know that an awful lot of the people involved hid their faces, but as I pointed out before, you can hide your face, but the guards have up to 20,000 hours of CCTV footage. You will not have hidden your face, so you may get the bus in from Drumcondra and you might get off O'Connell Street. You won't have hidden your face on O'Connell Street or on Drumcondra. So you did the criminality, you hid your face, but you didn't hide your face before and after. So I was at the Joint Policing Committee, or I was watching it, which is Dublin City Council's forum for senior Gardaí and politicians. So it was Assistant Commissioner Angela Willis, who spoke very well. She's a very good speaker, actually. So she gave a breakdown and said that they have 20,000 hours of CCTV footage, that there is a significant operation. There are 36, she said there are 36 Gardaí in Store Street, full-time investigating the riots. So that's an SIO, which is a senior investigation officer and detective inspector, 4 sergeants and 31 Gardaí. That's a big operation. So we know that 2 people have been arrested in recent days. 34 people have been arrested before that, and several have been charged. But my information is they have up to 200 suspects. So there's going to be more people getting knocks. And I think what they're doing is they're sort of triaging. We know, for example, that one of the Lewis trams was set on fire. That alone cost £3.5 million. They're really focusing on finding people involved in that. We know that there was egregious looting. We know that Garda cars were set on fire. We know that other places were attacked. The hotel, for example, was attacked. So they're sort of triaging and going after the big suspects first. But make no doubt about this, there are up to 200 people who are in the Garda's sights over this.
Yeah, like those joint policing committees are always interesting in terms of trying to get to grips with the level of crime going on. Of course, Dublin is the capital city. It's the area with by far the biggest population. You have figures, I know, on firearms and calls to Gardaí, and that they show very much that Dublin, I presume, is the crime capital of Ireland, is it?
Oh no, it definitely is. So, as I say, Commissioner Willis gave a breakdown to the politicians. I think JPCs are really, really good and a really good sign of local democracy. They hold the guards to account, and the guards give as good as they get, shall we say. So Commissioner Willis said that last year in the DMR alone, its call centre received 401,000 calls for service. That's 48% of all the calls that Gardaí throughout the country got. They seized 1,035 firearms. I was really shocked by that. I had to double check, but she was right. I thought I misheard her. 1,000. Now that includes, replica firearms, but 1,035 firearms taken off the streets is really interesting. They also seized. Remember, I was talking about all the big drug seizures in the DMR, which goes from sort of Bray, north of Bray to Balbriggan and over to Clondalkin and Newcastle, Rathcoole, that area. They seized €75 million worth of drugs last year. So there's a team called the Dublin Crime Response Team. They were very, very active. And when I was collating the figures for last year, a lot of press releases were about them. They've been very active. So 75 million. And they also made 28,000 arrests and initiated over 109,000 prosecutions. And there were 31,500 searches and 87,000 patrols. And finally, they also seized although they seized €75 million worth of drugs, they also seized €8 million in cash, which they believe is the process of crime. So very busy year for the guards in Dublin.
And was there any sense at the Joint Policing Committee meeting that there's a shortage of Gardaí in Dublin? Was that raised at all at the meeting? It's
continuously raised. And, Commissioner Willis, she does hold her, she does stand her ground. She's basically saying the last time there was an attestation of guards at the Garda College in Templemore, I don't know the exact number, say it was, I think it was maybe 230, like 210 of them went to Dublin. So the bulk of guards coming out of Templemore are being sent to Dublin. And she did say that there's another one coming up in March, I think, and the vast bulk of them will be going to Dublin as well. So she's conscious of the criticism. And to be fair to the guards, it's clear that they are putting significant resources into what is called the DMR, the Dublin Metropolitan Region.
Okay, just moving on. I saw you had a story there a few days ago about this civilian worker, very sad story. This civilian worker dying in a fall inside Garda headquarters in Dublin last Friday. What happened there?
Yeah, he was a terrible story. He was working on a mast. He was a man in his 70s. So there are 3. If anybody's they call it the depot in Phoenix Park. So if anybody goes past it, you'll see there's a mast. There are actually 3 masts. There's one at the front and 2 sort of at the rear. And this man was working at a civilian contractor, and he was doing one over at the left, closer to the army barracks. And unfortunately, he was about 30 feet up, and he fell and died. So there are 2 investigations into that. One is by the guards themselves, and the other is by the Health and Safety Authority. But it's a terrible tragedy.
Okay, God, terrible story. We've covered lots of ground there, Mick. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think that's us. Look, it's you and I are talking about this on Thursday. It's very sad. Our colleagues all morning have been working on that terrible crash down in Carlow, in which 3 people were killed. Terrible working on these stories. So just our thoughts are with the families.
Absolutely horrendous story, and may they rest in peace, and our thoughts are with their families at the moment. Absolutely.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mick.
Thank you. We'll do it again
soon. Thank you.
Thanks. Cheers.